Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Tuesday, November 26, 2024. President Joe Biden announces a ceasefire agreement between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon, calling it good news and saying it was designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities, also expressing hope it will lead to an end to the fighting in Gaza. Coming up, we'll hear from President Biden and from Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who in a TV address to his country explains why he endorsed the ceasefire. Foreign ministers from the Group of 7 industrialized democracies expressing support for Ukraine and condemning what they call Russia's irresponsible and threatening nuclear rhetoric. Secretary of State Antony Blinken also says the Biden administration is working to finalize, quote, getting out the door $50 billion of frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Leaders of China, Mexico, and Canada react to President-elect Donald Trump's threat of stiff tariffs if illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking is not stopped. President-elect Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, visits the U.S.-Mexico border in Eagle Pass, Texas, with Governor Greg Abbott. Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal talks about his new report criticizing excessive airline fees as Thanksgiving travel is underway. And Donald Trump Jr. says who gets to ask questions at the daily White House briefing may change next year, with podcasters and new media replacing legacy media in the front seats. And we start with President Biden in the White House Rose Garden. Associated Press writes that Israel has approved a U.S. brokered ceasefire agreement with Lebanon's Hezbollah, setting the stage for an end to nearly 14 months of fighting linked to the ongoing war in the Gaza Strip.
Today, I have some good news to report from the Middle East. I just spoke with the Prime Minister of Israel and Lebanon. I'm pleased to announce that their governments have accepted the United States proposal to end the devastating conflict between Israel and Hezbollah. I want to thank President Macron of France for his partnership in reaching this moment. For nearly 14 months, a deadly conflict raged across the border that separates Israel and Lebanon. A conflict that began the day after the October 7 attack by Hamas on Israel. Hours later, at 2 a.m. in the morning, Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations backed by Iran attacked Israel in support of Hamas. Let's be clear, Israel did not launch this war. The Lebanese people did not seek that war either, nor did the United States.
President Biden in the White House Rose Garden. Back to the Associated Press article. Just as the deal was announced, Israeli warplanes kept up the most intense wave of strikes in Beirut and its southern suburbs since the war began. At least 24 people were killed in strikes across the country, according to local authorities, as Israel signaled it aims to keep pummeling Hezbollah before the ceasefire is set to take hold. Back to President Biden in the White House Rose Garden. He described the details of the ceasefire deal.
Under the deal reached today, effective at 4 a.m. tomorrow local time, the fighting across the Lebanese-Israeli border will end. Will end. This is designed to be a permanent cessation of hostilities. What is left of Hezbollah and other terrorist organizations will not be allowed, I emphasize, will not be allowed to threaten the security of Israel again. Over the next 60 days, the Lebanese army and state security forces will deploy and take control of their own territory once again. Hezbollah terrorist infrastructure in southern Lebanon will not be allowed to be rebuilt. And over the next 60 days, Israel will gradually withdraw its remaining forces. And civilians on both sides will soon be able to safely return to their communities and begin to rebuild their homes, their schools, their farms, their businesses, and their very lives. We're determined this conflict will not be just another cycle of violence. And so the United States, with the full support of France and our other allies, has pledged to work with Israel and Lebanon to ensure that this arrangement is fully implemented, the agreement totally implemented. There will be no U.S. troops deployed in southern Lebanon. This is consistent with my commitment to the American people to not put U.S. troops in combat in this conflict. Instead, we, along with France and others, will provide the necessary assistance to make sure this deal is implemented fully and effectively. Let me be clear. If Hezbollah or anyone else breaks the deal and poses a direct threat to Israel, then Israel retains the right to self-defense, consistent with international law, just like any country when facing a terrorist group pledged to that country's destruction. At the same time, this deal supports Lebanon's sovereignty, and so it heralds a new start for Lebanon, a country that I've seen most of over the years, a country with rich history and culture. If fully implemented, this deal can put Lebanon on a path toward a future that's worthy of its significant past.
President Joe Biden in the White House Rose Garden, he went on to say that there will be a new effort to try to reach a ceasefire in Gaza in talks with Egypt, Qatar, Turkey, and Israel. Earlier in the day, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu gave a TV address to his country in which he endorsed the ceasefire in Lebanon and also said that Israel will be monitoring it closely and reserves the right to act if it thinks it's being violated.
Tonight, I will bring before the cabinet a plan for a ceasefire in Lebanon. The duration of the ceasefire depends on what happens in Lebanon. We have an understanding with the United States. We are maintaining our full liberty to take military operations. If Hezbollah tries to attack us, if it arms itself, if it rebuilds infrastructure next to the borders, we will attack them. If they launch missiles, if they dig tunnels, we will attack. Yes, I can hear people saying that if we start a ceasefire, we will not be able to attack, we will not be able to resume the war. Let me remind you, this is exactly what people said to me when we entered into the ceasefire in Gaza, in which we released our hostages. People said we would not risk fighting, but we did. And how? People say to me, well, Hezbollah will lay low for a year or two, will rearm itself, and then it will attack us. But Hezbollah will commit a breach of the agreement not only when they fire at us, but even when they try to rearm themselves. For any such breach, we will react very forcefully.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a TV address before the successful vote of the Israeli Security Cabinet to approve the ceasefire. His office says the vote was 10-1. Also in that address, and the English interpretation is being provided by Sky News, the Prime Minister gave 3 specific reasons why this is a good deal for Israel.
So why is this the right time for a ceasefire? There are 3 main reasons. First, focusing on the Iranian threat, and there's no need to expand. Second, refreshing our forces and rearming our troops. And it's no secret. There have been delays, big delays, in the supply of arms. And this delay is about to stop soon. We will arm ourselves with sophisticated arms that will help us protect our troops and give us even greater force to complete our missions. And the third reason for a ceasefire now, isolating Hamas. From the second day of the war, Hamas was counting on Hezbollah fighting together with it. And once Hezbollah is eliminated, Hamas is left alone. Our pressure on Hamas will grow stronger, and this will help us in the sacred mission of bringing back our hostages.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in a TV address to his country. Again, the English interpretation provided by Sky News. A Reuters article on the costs of the war in Lebanon reads at least 3,768 people have been killed in Lebanon and 15,699 wounded since October 2023, according to Lebanon's health ministry. As of November 24th, the figures do not differentiate between Hezbollah fighters and civilians. The vast majority of casualties were inflicted after Israel went on the offensive in September. Hezbollah strikes have killed 45 civilians in northern Israel and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. At least 73 Israeli soldiers have been killed in northern Israel, the Golan Heights, and in combat in southern Lebanon, according to Israeli authorities. That's from the Reuters article. And as for monetary damages, it says the cost to housing is estimated at $2.8 billion, with more than 99,000 housing units partially or fully destroyed, according to a World Bank report. Some reaction to the ceasefire agreement from Senator Chuck Schumer, Democrat of New York, Majority Leader. He writes, this is a good deal for Israel and the region that will ensure Israelis can return to their homes in the north and protects Israel's security against Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah. As this agreement shows, he writes, when terrorists are beaten back both militarily and through dogged diplomacy, the likelihood of peace increases. And he says, I applaud the Biden administration for this agreement and for continuing to work to negotiate a ceasefire and the return of all hostages in Gaza. Congressman Mike Waltz, Republican of Florida, who will be the national security advisor when President-elect Donald Trump takes office in January, posting on X, everyone is coming to the table because of President Trump. His resounding victory sent a clear message to the rest of the world that chaos won't be tolerated. I'm glad to see concrete steps towards de-escalation in the Middle East, but let's be clear, the Iran regime is the root cause of the chaos and terror that has been unleashed across the region. We will not tolerate the status quo of their support for terrorism. That was from the incoming National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz. This is Washington Today. From the New York Times, Russia said on Tuesday that Ukraine had struck its territory again with U.S.-supplied missiles, just as the Ukrainian Air Force reported that Russia had unleashed an immense air assault overnight that involved nearly 200 drones. The attacks were the latest in the series of intensifying air assaults between the two countries in recent days, in a sudden escalation that has shifted the focus away from ground assaults to a Cold War-style missile brinksmanship. That was from the New York Times article. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken addressed the war in Ukraine at a news conference at the summit of the foreign ministers from the G7, the world's top industrialized democracies, in Italy.
The U.S. is continuing to surge security assistance to bolster Ukraine's defenses in the east and to respond to the escalation by Russia and, in particular, now the involvement of troops from North Korea. And let me say on that that this is a matter of grave concern for all the members of the G7, both because of what it means for Ukraine, what it means for broader European security, but also what it means in the Indo-Pacific. We see that the security between the Indo-Pacific and the Euro-Atlantic community are joined. The relationship between Russia and North Korea is a two-way street. We see what North Korea is doing for Russia in Ukraine right now with the troops, but we also are looking attentively at what Russia is and may be doing for North Korea, including potentially boosting its missile and nuclear capacity. So this was a shared concern among all the G7 partners. But in our support for Ukraine, we're also finalizing getting out the door the $50 billion that have been secured on the basis of the Russian sovereign assets that are frozen. Last week, the United States unveiled its latest sanctions on Russia's financial sector, including Gazprom Bank. And we, I think, can anticipate further action by G7 countries as well. The G7 and partner countries have committed more than $2 billion to the energy sector in Ukraine since Russia escalated its attacks on that sector. As we head into the winter, we have G7 plus donors supporting, among other things, repairs for damaged power plants to restore over 2 gigawatts of generation capacity, the delivery of over 18,000 generators to help heat homes, hospitals, and schools. The G7 has also led the global push for enduring security commitments to Ukraine. 27 countries have now signed bilateral security agreements with Ukraine to help provide for their deterrence and defense capacity over the next decade. Today, the G7 had the opportunity to speak with Foreign Minister Sabia about these and other lines of effort to further ensure that we're strengthening Ukraine's military and economic position going into and through 2025. We're determined that Ukraine has the money, the munitions, and mobilized forces to fight effectively in 2025 or to negotiate, but from a position of strength.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a news conference at the G7 foreign ministers meeting in Italy. Story from Reuters. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has agreed to testify publicly at a House Representatives Committee hearing on the 2021 withdrawal from Afghanistan, the panel said on Tuesday after a long dispute with the Republican-led committee. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chair Michael McCaul said Blinken had committed to appear at a public hearing on December 11th to discuss the committee's investigation of the withdrawal 3 years ago. The committee and the State Department have been wrangling over Blinken's appearance for months. Panel Republicans voted in September to recommend recommend Blinken be held in contempt of Congress for failing to comply with a subpoena. That was from Reuters. Another Reuters article, a number of unidentified drones have been spotted over 3 United States Air Force bases in England over the last 6 days, U.S. officials said on Tuesday. Small unmanned aerial systems were spotted in the vicinity of and over RAF Lakenheath, RAF Mildenhall, and RAF Fentwell from November 20th to the 26th, a spokesman said in an emailed response to Reuters. The 3 bases, 2 in Suffolk, 1 in Norfolk, are leased by the United States Air Force from Britain. Reporting from Reuters. At the Pentagon, the Press Secretary Pat Ryder was asked about this.
General Ryder, there have been a number of incidents in England with drones targeting U.S. bases, kind of swarming U.S. bases, challenging security. Do you believe they have hostile intent? Do you believe they were sent by a foreign adversary? What is happening what can you tell us about these drones?
What I would tell you, Jennifer, is that they are being actively monitored. Installation leaders have determined so far that none of these incursions impact the base residents, the facilities, or the assets that we have on those bases. We're, of course, continuing to work with host nation authorities and our mission partners to ensure the safety of our personnel, our facilities, and the equipment. You know, the bottom line is it's something that we're going to take seriously. We're continuing to look into it, but as of right now has not had any significant mission impact.
Why not shoot them down?
Well, I won't get into force protection measures. We, of course, always maintain the right to defend ourselves if we deem something to be a threat. But again, we'll continue to work with the local host nation authorities there.
Lastly, do you think it's linked to the drones that were sighted at 3 or 4 different locations back in December of last year that we reported on recently on the state side?
Yeah, I don't want to speculate and draw unnecessary connections. You know, again, this is something that we'll look into. As you know, small UASs, drones, have become something that's, you know, relatively common now across the landscape. It's something that the department has been looking closely at in terms of how it applies to our facilities, our personnel, whether it's in combat zones or outside of combat zones. But in terms of these particular incidents in the UK versus the ones in the States, you know, again, I don't want to speculate that there's any connection.
They don't appear to be those of hobbyists. Is that correct?
Again, it would be, you know, premature to draw any conclusions. We've got to see what these are. I mean, it's entirely possible that it could be hobbyists or something else. We just got to look into it.
The Pentagon Press Secretary Pat Ryder, Air Force Major General, at his news conference at the Pentagon. Story from USA Today. Officials in China, Mexico, and Canada criticized Tuesday a pledge made by President-elect Donald Trump on social media to impose new tariffs on all 3 of the United States' largest trading partners on the first day of his presidency. Trump said the move, which appears to violate the terms of a free trade deal Trump signed into law in 2020, is aimed at clamping down on drugs, fentanyl especially, and migrants crossing into the U.S. illegally. The president-elect said he would sign an executive order immediately after his inauguration, introducing a 25% tariff on all goods coming from Mexico and Canada and a 10% tariff on goods from China. That was from the USA Today article. President-elect Trump wrote on Truth Social on Monday night the tariffs would stay in place, quote, until such time as drugs, in particular fentanyl, and all illegal aliens stop this invasion of our country. The Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke to reporters in Ottawa.
I had a good call with Donald Trump last night again. We obviously talked about laying out the facts, talking about how the intense and effective connections between our 2 countries flow back and forth. We talked about some of the challenges that we can work on together. It was a good call. This is something that we can do, laying out the facts, moving forward in constructive ways. This is a relationship that we know takes a certain amount of working on, and that's what we'll do. One of the really important things is that we be all pulling together on this. The Team Canada approach is what works. That's where, putting aside partisanship, that's where I reached out immediately to Doug Ford to agree with him that we would have a First Ministers meeting this week to talk about the United States. Talked with François Legault and some other premiers as well. There's work to do, but we know how to do it.
Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau speaking to reporters in Ottawa. Mexico's president, writes the Financial Times, hinted at retaliation over U.S. President-elect Donald Trump's proposed tariffs on her nation's exports on Tuesday as the peso slid against the dollar. President Claudia Sheinbaum read a letter that she sent to President-elect Trump at her daily news conference in Mexico City.
Presidente Trump, no es con amenazas.
President Trump, neither threats nor tariffs are going to address the phenomenon of migration or the problem of drug consumption in the United States. We need cooperation and mutual understanding to face these great challenges. One tariff will be met with another one in response, and that will continue until we put shared businesses at risk. Yes, shared. For example, some of our main exporters from Mexico to the United States are General Motors, Stellantis, and Ford Motor Company, which have been in Mexico for 80 years. Why impose a tax that could put them at risk? It's not acceptable. It would cause inflation and job loss in the United States. I'm convinced that the economic strength of North America is rooted in maintaining our commercial society. That way we can keep being competitive against other economic blocs. I believe dialogue is the best path to understanding peace and prosperity of our nations.
Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, part of her news conference in Mexico City. Spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington, Lu Pengyu, responding to the threats of tariffs from President-elect Trump, said in a statement, "No one will win a trade war or a tariff war, and the idea of China knowingly allowing fentanyl precursors to flow into the United States runs completely counter to facts and reality." Associated Press article reads, the tariffs, if implemented, could dramatically raise prices for American consumers on everything from gas to automobiles to agricultural products. The U.S. is the largest importer of goods in the world, with Mexico, China, and Canada its top three suppliers, according to the most recent U.S. Census data. President-elect Trump's choice for border czar visited the U.S.-Mexico border today in Eagle Pass, Texas, with Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican. Tom Homan and Greg Abbott serving meals to Texas National Guard soldiers and Texas Department of Public Safety troopers who will be stationed there over the holiday. Washington Times article notes that Eagle Pass is the site of a major clash between the Biden administration and the governor, who deployed National Guard troops to take over a public park the feds had been using as a staging ground for catch and release of illegal immigrants. And from the article, Mr. Abbott has built the state's own sections of border wall and placed razor wire along the Rio Grande and floating barriers in the river to deter illegal immigrants. Mr. Homan called that a model for the rest of the border. The two spoke. First, Governor Abbott.
There is a change afoot as we speak right now. And it's something that formally occurs on January the 20th, but has already begun. Actions, planning, preparation, schematics, everything that needs to be done is being done to make sure that there is no time gap whatsoever. That as soon as January the 20th occurs, there is going to be a change in the way that the United States of America protects our border and protects the sovereignty of the United States of America. And we have with us the person who's going to be the tip of the spear of leading that effort, and that is Tom Homan, a person that you probably know is well experienced at this. If I recall correctly, you served in the Border Patrol, served the head of ICE, and as we say in Texas, this is not his first rodeo. He's been down this pathway before, done this before, comes ready and prepared with both the physical attributes, the mental attributes, and the experience attributes to make sure that we're going to be doing more and faster than anything that's ever been done to, first of all, regain control of our border, restore order in our communities, and also identify, locate, and deport criminals in the United States of America who have come across the border, who are preying upon our fellow Texans and our fellow Americans, and make sure that we restore safety and law and order in communities across the entire United States of America.
Governor Greg Abbott, Republican of Texas, in Eagle Pass, Texas today on the U.S.-Mexico border with Tom Homan, named by President-elect Trump to be border czar.
We're not waiting until January. We're already talking. We're already planning. We're going to put a plan in place and secure this nation at the highest level it's ever seen. We're going to finish Trump's work. I want to say thank you to each and every one of you. What people don't understand that what you've done in Texas, for every ounce of fentanyl your trooper sees, are less overdose deaths. For every person you arrest for trespassing and put them through a fingerprinting process, that's one less getaway. At least we know who these people are. What you've done is not only protect the state of Texas and the citizens of Texas, you are protecting this nation. And it's a shame we have other governors and other mayors who are right out of the gate have said they're going to push back on President Trump what we're trying to do, especially for interior enforcement. Let me be clear. There is going to be a mass deportation because we just finished a mass illegal immigration crisis on the border, where anybody can look at 9 out of 10 people who claim asylum at the border will end up with an order removal. So you can't ask for the right to claim asylum, the right to see a judge, the right to due process, and we give you that due process, and at the end of that due process, a federal judge orders you removed, we have to remove them. Because if we don't, shut down the immigration court. Those orders don't mean anything anymore. Take you guys off the border because there's no consequences. So you can't demand due process and the right to claim asylum and not obey the court order. That is why there needs to be a mass deportation. We have a mass number of people, millions of people who will get a final order and be order removed. If we don't do it, what is the option? Let them stay? Because if you let them stay, you'll never fix the border. You're going to send a message to the rest of the world. Enter the country legally, which is a crime. Ignore a court order. You never have to go home. We're telling the whole world it's okay to enter this country legally. You never got to go home. We're a nation of laws, and we're going to enforce the laws. The men and women of ICE, they're going to have a tough job ahead of them. And I'm sending a message for the people that said they're going to get in our way. They're going to stop us from doing what we're doing on interior enforcement operation. I've said 100 times in the last week, don't cross that line. It is a felony to knowingly harbor and conceal an illegal alien from immigration authorities. Don't test us.
Tom Homan, the incoming border czar in the Trump administration, in Eagle Pass, Texas, with the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. Story from Newsweek. President-elect Donald Trump's immigration advisors are discussing plans to enlist local law enforcement to help the federal government deport undocumented immigrants, according to sources familiar with the matter. The Trump transition team has begun discussions about having the Department of Homeland Security work with state and local police forces to fast-track the deportation of undocumented immigrants living in the country. People working with the transition team and others familiar with the plan told Newsweek. That was from Newsweek. Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat of New York, the minority leader, spoke last night with former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, who opposed President Trump's candidacy, about the expected policies of the new administration, including immigration and border security.
This is a question from Kalila, who's here in person. President-elect Trump has stated his vision for a mass deportation operation using the active duty military following inauguration. What's your sense of how that's likely to play out, and what role you see Congress playing in conjunction with his efforts to do that?
Well, this is going to be one of those areas where I think it's going to have to be all hands on deck. And while we understand that we need to secure the border and that we have a broken immigration system, that we need to fix in a comprehensive way, in a bipartisan way, ensure that there are legal pathways towards citizenship, and build upon prior bipartisan efforts, including efforts that took place, under the Bush-Cheney administration, and subsequently legislation carried by John McCain, and then legislation that emerged from the Senate that was passed out of the Senate in a bipartisan way in 2013. Hopefully, at some point, we can get back to that bipartisan discussion about fixing our broken immigration system, right-sizing it, and ensuring that we can continue to be both a nation anchored in the rule of law and a nation of immigrants at the same period of time, which has been one of our incredible competitive economic strengths. But the notion of mass deportation is an example of possible overreach. The American people don't want to see families broken up. They don't want to see legal residents ripped away from their homes and deported in ways that are inconsistent with who we are. Now, that's not to say that the incoming administration shouldn't prioritize, as prior administrations, including the administration of Barack Obama, focused on violent felons. Anyone who presents a harm to the American people and is here unlawfully should not be allowed to remain. And prior administrations, both Democrats and Republicans, have focused in that way in making sure that you are deporting felons but not breaking up families, including families with lawful permanent residents or even citizens that may be subject to the mass deportation web. That's not acceptable. The American people don't want to see that. And if they overreach, there will be a big backlash, I predict, in the United States of America.
Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, Democrat from New York, Minority Leader of the House, in a conversation with former Congresswoman Liz Cheney, Republican from Wyoming, at the 6th and I Historic Synagogue in Washington, D.C. Monday night. They also spoke about Hakeem Jeffries' career and his new book titled The ABCs of Democracy. Washington Today continues in a moment.
Make your Giving Tuesday donation go twice as far. This year, you can double the impact of your gift to C-SPAN and support unfiltered access to your government. A generous C-SPAN supporter has pledged to match the first $10,000 in donations, meaning every dollar you give will be matched, making your contribution go twice as far. By supporting C-SPAN, you ensure transparent, unfiltered access to your government. Our no commentary, no spin coverage allows you to make up your own mind. Don't wait for Giving Tuesday. Make your impact today. Donate now at cspan.org/donate, and your contribution will be matched dollar for dollar. Visit cspan.org/donate today to help keep democracy unfiltered. Thank you.
Welcome back to Washington Today, available as a podcast wherever you find your podcasts and on the free C-SPAN Now mobile app. Just in time for the busy Thanksgiving holiday travel. From Reuters, the U.S. Senate panel on Tuesday criticized rising airline fees for seat assignments and luggage and will call air carrier executives to testify on December 4th. Senator Richard Blumenthal, who chairs the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations, will convene a hearing titled The Sky's the Limit, New Revelations About Airline Fees, with senior executives from American Airlines, United Airlines, Delta Airlines, Spirit Airlines, and Frontier. Blumenthal's report disclosed the 5 airlines collectively earned $12.4 billion in revenue from seat fees between 2018 and 23, and said last year for the first time United earned $1.3 billion in seat fees, more than the $1.2 billion it earned from checked bag fees, report said. That was from Reuters. Senator Blumenthal was on MSNBC's program Morning Joe this morning talking about it.
They consist of what the airlines call ancillary charges. Decisions about where you sit, whether you check a bag, whether you can carry a bag onto the plane, whether you can be next to your minor child. All of these kinds of junk fees are additional charges, some as high as $300 or more. And what we have found is, in this year-long investigation by the Permanent Subcommittee on Investigation, getting documents, interviews, and so forth, is that an increasing share of the airline's revenue comes from these fees, and also that they are now exploring and considering the use of technology, increased use of algorithms to target these fees at individuals based on their personal characteristics. In effect, moving toward the use of artificial intelligence to set fees based on an individual's zip code or other kinds of information.
So, Senator, I imagine so many people watching at home are nodding along angrily because they've had to pay these fees, which have undeniably risen. So now that you have these findings, what's next? Is there an enforcement mechanism here? Is it something that the airlines may voluntarily change, or is there something that you guys will have to legislate away?
We're going to have a hearing on December 4th. We're going to hold them accountable. We're going to ask tough questions, and then we're going to make some recommendations. I have sponsored a measure called the Junk Fees Prevention Act, which would forestall these fees. There's also the Passenger Bill of Rights, which I have led. I'm not counting on legislation. I'm very clear-eyed about the chances of our Congress actually imposing some new laws. The Department of Transportation could use existing authority to do more, but again, under this new Trump administration, which is talking about eliminating regulation, I am going to be very clear-eyed there too. So I think the airlines have to be pressured. And it will be difficult because there's been increased consolidation. In other words, fewer airlines. 4 of them now have 70% of the market share, and they march in lockstep often in imposing these kinds of abusive, excessive fees. I think we will have to put pressure on Congress, on the executive branch, and on the airlines themselves, and potentially through the courts seeking more competition.
Senator Richard Blumenthal, Democrat from Connecticut, on MSNBC this morning. The Transportation Security Administration expects to screen 18.3 million people at U.S. airports between today and Monday. That would be 6% more than during the same period last year. And TSA predicts 3 million people will pass through airport security on Sunday. Any more than that would break the record. Story from Politico. Vivek Ramaswamy took to X Tuesday to criticize the Biden administration's push to get $50 billion in chip-making subsidies signed and awarded before President-elect Donald Trump takes power in January. This is highly inappropriate. They're accelerating spending ahead of the transition of power, Ramaswamy said, linking to a Politico interview with Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo, where she discussed her remaining work to implement the CHIPS and Science Act. I'd like to have really almost all the money obligated by the time we leave, Raimondo told Politico last week. She said the forthcoming change in administration sets a clear deadline that focuses the mind, noting that her timeline was always the plan and not driven by the threat of a clawback under the Trump administration. Political article continues. Ramaswamy announced Monday night that he and Elon Musk's new Department of Government Efficiency will review every last-minute contract rolled out under the CHIPS Act and another Biden administration spending initiative, the Inflation Reduction Act. Ramaswamy said he'll also recommend that inspectors general scrutinize the spending. That was all from Politico. Ramaswamy was interviewed on Senator Marsha Blackburn's podcast this week. She's a Republican from Tennessee. And he said that the call for volunteers to help with this new Department of Government Efficiency, or DOGE, has yielded good results.
So one of the things that's most remarkable about this is we have seen literally thousands of not just, anybody, of some of the most talented, sharpest technical, legal, entrepreneurial minds in the country. And I'm talking about like at the very, very top tier. I mean, multi-billion-dollar companies that people have founded, that they're ready to leave their life in the private sector to come in for a little bit to help this country. And I think that that's really encouraging because historically, right, I'm a millennial. I've seen the evolution of where my peer group has gone. The glamorous jobs have been on Wall Street or in Silicon Valley or whatever, as the tides have changed over the years. I hope that DOGE plays a role in changing that mindset in the next generation of seeing. Imagine if you see some of the brightest founders, names that, for now, for present purposes, I'm not going to name the kinds of names, but famous people have heard of for building amazing, incredible companies, okay? Stepping in and saying, you know what I want to do? I want to serve the government by actually helping make it more efficient and better serve the taxpayer and the citizens of this country. That's an example for the next generation where that's a cool place to actually have an impact, to be able to say that you don't have to rise the ranks of some bureaucracy, but it's going to be based on merit, that the most capable people, even if they're young for that matter, can be put in positions of great impact and even authority. I think that could be one of the cooler things to come out of our project, is not just that we're tackling the costs and not just restoring self-governance in America. Those hopefully are important enough. But also maybe a cultural shift in how younger Americans and more talented entrepreneurial minds think about public service as actually a cool path to be able to have a big impact. But in order to do that, I think we've got to change what the culture of public service looks like, too. And so that's something we're trying to do in the way we're doing this. Elon and I are doing this from the outside. I think that changes things up a little bit. I don't think that a lot of DC insiders have had much success in taming the cost curve in the past. So I credit President Trump for his creativity and his open-mindedness in setting up something different to achieve a different result than we've achieved as a nation in the past. And I think that's what we're up on track to do.
Vivek Ramaswamy, tech entrepreneur, former presidential candidate, Republican, now co-leader of this advisory group set up under President-elect Donald Trump called DOGE, Department of Government Efficiency. Vivek Ramaswamy on Senator Marsha Blackburn's podcast posted Monday, and his co-leader on DOGE, Elon Musk, posting on his X account on Monday, "I still can't believe DOGE is real," and a couple of laughing emojis attached. Wall Street today, the Dow up 123, NASDAQ up 119, S&P up 34. Story from The Independent out of United Kingdom. Donald Trump has lashed out at the, quote, failing New York Times in an overnight Truth Social rant demanding an apology for its, quote, junk coverage of him and singling out its correspondent Maggie Haberman for particular criticism. The president-elect wrote on the Post, "Will the failing New York Times apologize to its readers for getting years of Trump coverage so wrong? They write such phony junk knowing full well how incorrect it is, only meaning to demean." The article says, pivoting to Haberman, Trump mockingly misspelled the reporter's name as he wrote, "Maggot Haberman, a third-rate writer and fourth-rate intellect, writes story after story, always terrible, and yet I almost never speak to her." The article says it's not clear what specifically rattled Trump on Monday night. However, the rant came shortly after the publication of a New York Times report from Haberman and her colleague Jonathan Swan, which revealed Trump's aide, Natalie Harp, had sent him a series of passionate letters declaring in one, "You are all that matters to me." Again, that was from The Independent. Donald Trump Jr., son of the president-elect and a surrogate for his father on the campaign trail and now during the transition, said on his podcast, Triggered, speaking with Daily Wire's Michael Knowles, that there could be changes to which reporters will be sitting in the White House briefing room in the next Trump administration.
As your father is assembling his team, as maybe Caroline Leavitt is looking at the new press briefing room chart, maybe it's time to reorder that chart and maybe take away some people's seats.
So we're going to break some news here because I literally had this conversation. I was flying back. I was on the plane, I guess with my father, I think it was coming back from the SpaceX launch with Elon last week. And I was sitting there and we were talking about like the podcast world and some of our friends and Rogan and guys like you and, you know, me to a lesser extent, you know, I wouldn't be able to get a seat. That would be nepotism or whatever the hell, you know, I'd be indicted again. I'd have to do more congressional testimony. So I'll pass. But we actually had this conversation about like, given how the media has behaved. I mean, you brought up the New York Times, you know, you saw the fact check of Bobby Kennedy talking about the different ingredients in Fruit Loops. And it was like, no, it's exactly the same as Canada, except we use yellow dye number 5 here instead of like orange, like carrots. And we use, you know, purple dye number 2,376 instead of blueberry extract. And I'm like, that's your fact check? Like, it's the same, but for these like really toxic chemicals that are banned in, you know, dozens of countries. Like, I don't get it. But we had the conversation about opening up the press room to a lot of these independent journalists. Like, you know, why should, if the New York Times has lied, they've been adverse to everything, they're functioning as the marketing arm of the Democrat Party, like, why not open it up to people who have larger viewerships, stronger followings? Like, it's not like the New York, I mean, how much money are they losing a year? The Washington Post, lost $45 to $70 million. You know, doesn't seem like they're a great success. So just because they've been there longer, it's like the way Congress functions. Like, you get a committee, not because you know anything about banking, but because you've been there longer. And it's like, right, doesn't seem like a great way to do things. So we've had that conversation. Like, that's a great idea, Don. I was like, I think we should do this. And so that may be in the works. Let's see. That's going to blow up some heads. So, you know, we'll see.
Donald Trump Jr. with Daily Wire's Michael Knowles on the Donald Trump Jr. podcast, Triggered, posted Monday. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Subscribe to C-SPAN's free evening newsletter Word for Word and get the stories making headlines in Washington sent to your inbox every day. You can sign up at cspan.org/connect. Have a good night.